Factory research upon science. He uses humankind faces exceptional activity, material activity, waste, rigorous chemical disruptions, and increasing source bank, particularly addressable to drug resistance and pathogenic bacteria extinction plug in into can be to result the antibiotic, the antibiotic presence, or superior test for resistance to staphylococcus toxins when both human species doctors not frightened, not making this up. We desperately need new drugs for resistant bacteria. Reps not first assumes determinism, food and seeds, specific evidence, riches, and equivalent repercussions, visual determinism, charges for the world, images, policy, medical back from images, is multi-node over policy, woman, word against negative terms in the power of images, and measure the influence of power of policy, hard to find to expense. On one example, the images targeting children who counter haters, criticize type disease standard, discussion of itself in these times, seeking demographic, first trails, for usefulness of such combinations is limited for the credit images, power and influence, they observe deeper, they deserve deeper analysis, experimentation potter for now Schwartz and 13 by 1% most stress and complex parallelism application states remains extremely uncrazy pressing their into conflict. Many crafts really application more so the launch to state choices where 1% of crisis is a test case for state experimentation on other issues. 13 cold have 20 penny concerns for a situation involving state culture express means wide question state determining control of states many further independence with other aspects such as immigration and health. Removing power from the CSA vessels experimentation avoids races of bomb shipment until season of seals consequences not for the federal south there remains a policy right federal regulation and fish birds and hanging innovation against systems at CSA potential enforcement experimentation competition innovative regulatory federal laws only that occurring state of nation states are left individes federal policies based on support devices and choice innovation G several station states experiment often very term policy repeal the CSA release of marijuana lead to the same benefits and state-based authority within the U.S. states will compete for very catastrophic risks in rapid environmental degradation, new WMD, opening democracy, able to rapidly simulate facts, is able to avoid disaster, benefits, rules that maximize new technically decentralization for experimentation, use valley consequence, different puzzles, right chosen by safe facilities, growth, mother, technology that we 4 times as much as result in the next 100 years that have in the last 1400 community power, 25 years from now is likely to be a million times more powerful than the day now takes optimally to optical community to walk in quantum computer likely to continue growing exponentially, heck of a very large negative extra now is may require government decision about regulation, AI, inevitable regs, ensure positive outcome, that prevents extinction, avoids downside, CSI, AI into between now and 2029. Scientists will work in functional design to create new AI will learn to increase its capable responses, repeated and will produce super intelligent products will also be progress will also be so rapid that it's fundamentally change our civilization over purposes and same time cataclysmic disasters stemming from tech threats threats to our plans such as asteroids climate change will be able to with these will AI be possible in the near future. Yes, engineers need to simulate the RNA will be created, but when how will not depend on how aggressively and responsibly we set about solving the problem. Strong AI regs, 12 catastrophic arms races and accident both cause extinction, trauma, and limiting choosing to restrict and manage AR to reduce risk in arms race dynamic may give states incentive to pursue very dangerous research as paper discussing parameters which race to fail challenges that from race and nuclear potential for small differences in research produce massive disparities, high risk of accidental catastrophe and barriers to verification of trees creates a serious health risk. Millions pollution causes a large number of deaths from cancer, beliefs, hazardous with every year mindful factor 79% of all cancers. Plan would solve in urban centers, landowners from urban and urban farmers will solve toxins even if their aim is just to capture toxins, subflow and 12 brownfield strain urban farming routes hazardous hazardous waste over the land can be cleaned. Lenders are non-financially incentivized to do so. Private remediation works for all stakeholders involved from the landowner to buyer remediation. It offers a cheap decontamination also allows them to utilize current taxes and green taste for the urban farm. Fire remediation gives access to cultivation of certain cash crops. Have this unlike any other fire remediation. It flips the economics and solves even if people have bad intentions and their intent often due to economic reasons. Brownfields for decades contamination. Contaminants can seep into areas surrounding brownfields. Will go by cleaning brownfields. Most current cleaning techniques involve remediation methods such as injecting material. This makes cleanup expensive. Just by better, more innovative solutions. Fire remediation use plants that bring into hazardous waste by using the plants that clean the soil contaminants and underlying any underlying groundwater begin to dissipate. Have is the best fighter remediate by changing federal laws, keep it show into a license to real water remediation. Some countries reduces something to the other factors. Its fast absorption and ability to bind chemicals laws forbidding cannabis, making it impossible to plant hemp to go. There has a sites need to clean up 17 states allow hemp federal regulation supersede any attempt to plant a crop on waste root causing plants that are missing point each for activism field. In 12 ways blows down saying that regulation never been created in the first place. Sorts up to the industry, solve the waste and stuff is you can't just wish away the problem must be solved. But whenever anyone makes an attempt to do that, it's the same protest the naysay is read the naysay is wrapped up in I told you so attitude. Come time to let it sit as it is. Well, there is our responsibility of the solution to get our collective heads out of the sandy AFIA often gets accused of accomplishing nothing by teaching non-concrete activists in prohibition refers to self-formally bring the legal legalization to removing the legal prohibition rather than describing a form of legal regulation. The plan just adds illegality. That's not a commitment to pro-profit models. Kilmer in 15 commercial sales not the only alternative prohibition of marijuana. Many options for the legalization of marijuana policy should not be viewed as a binary issue between prohibition and for-profit commercial models. Several intermediate options could be considered back to state experimentation. Nanotech, natural strong US-led regs ensure safe development. That is nanotechnology may touch every faster life ever. Nanotechnology may injure human kind of dangerous for weapons of terrorism. Because nanotech is essential in imperial society. We should regulate, review, replicator spread, uncontrolled, deliberating origins for foreseeable future environmental contamination. Nanoproducts will be released nanotech. Good change global warfare, terrorism, biological creative nano-enhanced components. Detection system would be inadequate, will possible maximum amount of control. Effects nanotechnology should be regulated, trustworthy system, currently defended. Overseas research ensuring US global leadership was regulation may be necessary. Extinction bots from 2 nanotech replicators could eat up the biosphere. Then this might cause the extinction of life on Earth. There will still be danger of an arms race between states possessing nanotech molecular manufacturing goods would lead to an arms race. I got it. Okay. Alright, are we ready?
given things like stem cell, the AI development that your other advantage talks about, how can marijuana research be sufficient to depoliticize science in the eyes of our cooperative partners?
I think I missed the first part of your question.
There's stem cell, there's AI, etc. There's a bunch of political science issues. How does marijuana research overcome them?
Well, our app indicates that marijuana is one of the largest ones because there's literally no scientific evidence to prove the DEA's stance on marijuana. Whereas there is some debatable scientific about other issues in the status quo, but the overwhelming consensus of scientists is that marijuana ought to be used for.
So your claim is only that further research, just the research itself, regardless of its conclusions, will be sufficient to depoliticize science?
Our argument is that removing marijuana from the CSA is sufficient to depoliticize science.
Let's talk about the rules card that you read after the plan. Is this definition exclusive? And by that I mean, can legalization include regulations, or does this card claim that legalization definitely does not?
The plan does not mandate regulations.
But
that doesn't answer my question.
Regulations could follow, but that's nothing that we've committed to.
Is that, I know I'm just talking about the term legalization. Does the term legalization imply that it doesn't mandate regulations?
It doesn't preclude regs, but does not mandate it.
Okay, sure. What do the states need to do at next gen and nanotech that they are not able to do now?
Well, the federal government controls pretty much all next gen research in the SQO. That prevents states from adopting different strategies. Evidence list, for example, our McInnes evidence list, for example, states would operate with different rights bundles for things like artificial intelligence and nanotech. And other emerging technologies. They would be able to apply different regulations, which would allow for greater data collection and
let's talk about the
best practices.
Waste advantage. How do your authors determine what a brownfield is?
I'm not sure.
Do you think so you say that the waste is primarily located in brownfields? Is that a mean? What's a brownfield? What makes it brown?
Waste sites.
Yeah, we never said that waste is only in brownfields. We said that
I'm just
there's hazardous
trying
waste.
To ask about your lemon card, which is all about brownfields and provides no explanation of what classifies a brownfield or how we redevelop them.
Well, he does say how we would get the waste out of brownfields. But yeah, you're right. Our evidence doesn't define what a brownfield is. I mean,
so what? Okay, this is just okay. The evidence that says that hemp is unlike any phytoremediator says that brownfields have sat idle for decades at a time without any redevelopment, rendering them useless. This dead area becomes unavailable for use, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
How can the affirmative resolve the economic deadness of the area that is not solely located in the fact that there's
Lemon and
radiation?
your rule indicate that there's a massive incentive to grow hemp after the plan because it's a cash crop and you get a tax break for creating green spaces.
I just emailed it out. It's 4 off research, radiation, state experimentation.
You have the stand maybe, or is that good?
It's a little short.
Or you can use their stand, yeah. Where are the others?
It's really tough.
Is everyone ready?
I think I'm not going to pick up the internet. Did you get it? Can you jump on screen?
Yeah, you just got kicked off. Sure.
Dude, Prison Mike's eyes follow me no matter where I am. He's always looking at me. I'm not insane.
That's John's nickname for me in prison life.
It's really.
Are y'all good?
Speaking of mics,
Okay.
First is to critique the affirmative modern equivalent of Brown versus Board of Education for the carceral state Tate and 14 legal representation long-term and show political constitutes the counterplan that came with landmark 1954 Brown essentially outlawing teachers segregation, public schools, legalization of marijuana, and do the same topic for the claimantly on various American law legalization reduces public responsibility to racism or commit racism, and any sort of fiction is probably dismissed the same manner that concerns diversity education, public schools are dismissed, legalization vote free prisoners. We advocate instead an abolitionist practice that works to establish medium-term steps towards ending Ben Moshi. In 2011, abolition requires division, but also taking immediate steps. The goal is to improve present circumstances without comprising a larger goal. Possibility is something that might happen in the future. Potentiality represents the imminent, that which is present but not fully manifesting. Must strive in the face of the here and now to think and feel then and there. We must dream and enact new and better pleasures. Other ways of being in the world. This vision is applicable to prison abolition rather than stop the world as if it's an absolute break between now and then. It's a daily part of the radical life living today, the way we would like the future to be. The central function of utopia is a critique of what's present. Matthewsian's work theorized abolition as the unfinished, reclaimed utopia as liberatory would conceive this work as helpful in fashioning new ways of envisioning the world. Concrete utopias represent collective hopes and are the blocks upon which hope can exist. And challenging institutional racism is a prior ethical question. Memi in 2000, the struggle against racism is to be undertaken without deceit, without concession. One cannot be indulgent towards racism to give it merely a foothold to which what is human, to accept the racist universal society's degree is to endorse fear, injustice, and violence. It is to accept the outside will always be possible victim to conduct conduct oneself morally is a condition for the establishment of a human order for which racism is very negation is almost redundancy, or for the almost redundancy. One cannot find a moral order, let alone a legislative order. Racism signifies exclusion of the other, is their subjection to violence. Racism is the truly capitalist and injustice, engendering violence and death all in society, and within itself the seed of its own death or abuse. Or racism is a condition for all morality. Next up is topicality. The affirmative is not legalization. It only removes the federal ban on marijuana, which leaves in place all state laws criminalizing LTRE, and 13 legislative measures will remove marijuana from controlled substances act. With this make marijuana legal everywhere? No, it would allow states who wish to pursue legalization to do so without federal encouragement. These measures to pass marijuana to be the domain of the states. If states choose to legalize, can do so. If states choose to retain marijuana prohibition, it may as well limit, allows acid only tinker with single laws in the federal government, only work with some of the governments of the United States, devastates net ground, basing your advantages around legal, letting the states choose whether or not to legalize, destroy the predictability for negative links. Next, offers a counterplan text. The United States should legalize only marijuana grown outdoors. The United States should make necessary all relevant changes to facilitate state experimentation regarding next generation nanotechnology, including but not limited to congressional policies similar to the PACA and the Race to the Top program. Presidential directives in the Supreme Court decision that clarify the bill of right to apply to the states. The PIC solves the app and avoids the energy DA bulletin 14 licenses should push growers outdoors to ensure they are environmentally responsible for now crops, but tackle will prevail in the emerging industry of indoor cannabis production, also prodigious energy use, and legalization regulation make it different. People acquire a license or expected to follow the law of marijuana crop to be subject to the same environmental requirements or as any other agricultural activity. And the second plank solves the entire advantage, even if the PIC doesn't. McGinnis in 2011, the political branches must create space for decentralized experiments. For instance, the PPAC Obama would allow to expand these opportunities to allow the experimentation councils to create another mechanism for experimentation in the Race to the Top program, where states may apply funds for innovative changes. Congress should distract experimentation with states free to legislate for it preempts states' requirements for further mandate room for state experimentation. The president has the role to play. The president should order agencies to consider experiment. The Supreme Court also has the role to play. The Supreme Court and chemistry and jurisprudence, including the component that interprets the bill of rights that applies to states. Next up is the DA. Sustained low natural gas prices in the status quo. Only increased demand can cause a change yet in 15. Natural gas are trading at depressed prices. Not much changes to cause low prices not similar to what's plaguing the oil price. Excess supply. Natural gas shortage in the U.S. will exceed the 5-year average. That's the most bearish factor. The only way for natural gas prices to rise is with significant demand. Indoor marijuana growing operations are a massive consumer of electricity. Legalization causes exponential expansion. Lorenz and 14 indoor marijuana operations account for 1% of all electric consumption. The first challenge may be to keep up with the increased demand. If the legalized marijuana industry expands demand for power, may increase on prohibition as a proportion of basic utility demand could come from existing growers who have relied on diesel generators or other off-grid power sources. Marijuana alone can spark significant changes to utilities long-term load forecast. And a spike in electricity demand causes a spike in natural gas prices. EIA and 12 net gas prices are a function of demand because they're limited short-term alternatives. The fuel for generators changes over a short period results in large price changes. Natural gas price escalation causes large-scale economic decline. Land 14 literature documented strong cost connection between energy price activity and energy cost prices. A large share of total cost energy costs for 1/3 of cost of the power sector. Natural gas price shocks have large effects in natural gas price because shock can have larger and persistent effects. And U.S. economic decline in both its adversaries ensures extinction. Rebuttals, Hanlon, and 12 economic weakness on countries each of our countries that will weakest water about a report decline. Country will take action to reflect skepticism about America's future. Allies, friends down. Our commitment after sets opportunity to be less restrained. The Persian Gulf Pacific region will become less stable. Miniature war will be more likely. The medical research advantage. This advantage is a double turn with the one about speeding experiment of advanced tech, which would be more politicization of everything other than marijuana. They have no evidence that marijuana overcomes those things. Antibiotic resistant diseases are irrelevant. Russian TV 15. Researchers may have found a new antibiotic that bacteria will not be resistant to for decades using lymph node devices. There was sort of example, Gilotexio, vaccines of previously undiscovered antibiotics, vaccines such as attack marker by running to fatty lipids that make up the bacterial cell wall. The challenge is not with the proper the bacterial will result resistance with one, maybe not in this case. Essentially, we're restricting the bacteria to use the team use the eye chip, takes the back to the fish, the eye chips are rotting, the rod guarantees we'll get more fish. Eye chip works by sorting individual bacterial cells. Typically, only about 1% of microbes in the cell sample to grow in the lab. The eye chip expands the number to 50%. No complete resistance is possible. Antibiotics will still work. Cellulars in wait in 5 kilos. Antibiotics will return to actually antibiotic error. Let's find what we lose now. We have here system. Serious disease will still be treatable, even in the case of a bacterial species that are known for resistant antibiotics. There are some strains that remain susceptible to most antibiotics and focus on solution on strains and are beyond resistant antibiotics. I to pay more attention to those strains that seem to have gotten onto the resistance bandwagon. There will not be loss of antibiotics. Budget cuts destroy scientific leadership, morale, 11 spend cuts would effectively end American leadership status, the leader of the world scientific community, continue budget legislation, slash the budget federal environment and energy science agencies, or back called the House Cuts, that single issues over delicate the United States respond to second class death in the scientific community. No evidence that other countries perceive the states, which means our budget cuts arguments comes first. And science leadership doesn't solve conflict and create cooperation. Dixon. Now the conversation meeting over science, or actually, that's fine. Just move on to the other advantage. Radiation. No impact. Low levels of radiation are inevitable, and Fukushima didn't kill anyone. Slightly higher rate of thyroid cancer isn't an argument. There's no internal, zero evidence people would grow more hemp after the plant, just if they could. There's no economic incentive, and there are evident the international competition to meet market viability. Johnson 14th of the total use market differs from state reports as less favorable. I debut the potential market for hemp growers. US hemp market is small, and also not uncertainty about long-term demand and oversupply hemp production. Not looking at generic sensible profit size profitable, and other specialty crops due to current technologies used hemp growers can be affected by competition from other world-produced laws. Production limitation. The United States most estimates of profitability from hemp are highly speculative, and do not include additional costs of growing hemp and regulated markets such as licensing. And the status quo is decriminalization, but legalization causes regulations and disproportionately harm people and minorities, causes net more persecution. Gilla and 14 decriminalization marijuana almost here. We should wear regulations starting to legalize production of crack businesses that have been subject to strict licensing laws to obtain license. Colorado owners must undergo a full criminal background check. Given the disproportionate enforcement of drug policy on minorities, such requirement to skew the new market in favor of white poor minorities will not be able to participate in the legal drug companies. States continue to charge enormous taxes. The black market for cheap marijuana. Reverse law center protect legal marijuana business interests will be used to persecute those participating in the black market. In cross-ex, they said that there could still be regulations, and normal means the government would implement them. Now, the state experimentation advantage. The feds will crack down. Feds will respect the most important part shown in 14 votes called federal rage, which the federal government really wants to federalize all marijuana law because it's a perfect matter. I think federal government will do that. Feds will be very likely to step on core areas of state regulation as there's a marijuana for both political and policy reasons. Huge all causes Obamacare, Moffitt in 10, ACA is rapidly altering the relationship. ACA is directly federal, federal is already unlocked to board around to a do not resist state order for federal Congress has intrigued.
Can you scratch that card?
Scratch that card. Do you want me to read the political polarization card? Political polarization means state experimentation is possible. People are in balancing towards depolarized party politics and policy at federal state levels. Government continue to affect the nature of federal government relations. Bottom state activists and build polarized policies among states and important issue areas. Specific mention marijuana policy rhetoric makes political decide even a state push forward their agenda led black national government. Federalism faces continued challenges spreading fragmented both theory and practice. Neo-tech development fails to take decades. Our shit translate the end investments to focus on basic reach, basic reach 300 and Japan applied research development. That's not primary focus. Basic reach can take decades to run commercial applications and advance in scientific understanding. We not presume in commercial opportunities. AI doesn't cause extinction. Dyson. In 2003, laws of 611 small beaches supply massive viscous shark out there, where water becomes darker, the creature becomes small, flying through air for an air. Robot will be like swimming through a molasses for a human being. The speed will be a tenth of an inch per second, barely fast enough to chase a snail. And marijuana is not key. Nadelson in 14 from marijuana legalization, federal math shark conclusion of wrong view. Areas of competition are very small, limited reports. Marijuana legalization small. Potatoes compared to the mass work on the Obamacare approach by coalition, so just really not stable. And it's a cooperation, experimentation, Brazilian Bowman, imposing 14 federalism has largely existed in the easier to federal aggregation at the expense of states. The literature has argued that states are not federal supplies for other. They change the mechanism to safeguard the place of states in their system in Congress, and the red retains core commitment to see autonomy, now forms of integration are means of preserving state federal separation, and it can't be fully restored or destroyed. Even 2K federals to change the never truly competitive cooperative, even in its competitive payday. American federals pay cooperative policies to others stand on the other extreme. Germany's cooperative efforts fail to stress all locational competition within each. The degree of competition varies across political policy sectors, condition under which competitive might preserve distortion proceeding with understanding stability of competitive policy arrangements and their impacts on possible science in 2 cases possible. The idea of little machines that grabs atoms and assemble them into desirable arrangements suffer from 3 false starts. It's wrong to think you can just manipulate an individual atom then handling the one as well. Chemistry is considered motion at least 10 atoms through that 1 atom. You'll need 10 nanoset of appendages to handle a nanometer just with them and 8 oxygen atoms.
Okay, can we make you go for the K or the counterplan?
No.
And you could.
Yeah.
Okay. The critique. Is it possible to envision the abolition of prisons without the CSA being removed?
We think that the removal of the CSA poses a question that the alternative would not deal with. So it's not.
Yes or no?
So the part about imagining is what we disagree with. It's not possible to imagine that.
So what exactly does the alt do about the CSA?
Well, we think if there's no prisons, then there would be no enforcement of criminal
How can
law.
there?
So Are you asking how the all results in abolition?
Yes.
Yeah, our piece of Ben Moshe evidence says that if we understand abolitionism as a utopia that exists within our daily lives, and it means that we can take concrete steps to move towards that.
So what are the concrete steps?
So, for example, in prison systems in Oakland, one of the things they did to resist the prison system was that they demanded that prisons overfund healthcare budgets, which improved the quality of life for people there, but it also forced them to make cuts in other areas.
So that's
We think
like
that's
they
an
have to
example
decide
of
on a
reform.
question. Why is the plan not a relevant question in those concrete
Because
steps?
our evidence says that the
Right.
legalization of marijuana is the equivalent of Brown versus Board
The
for
Tate
carceral.
evidence. See, the Tate evidence is just like when you say marijuana would end prison abolition. It's obviously not
I
true
disagree.
and doesn't
No.
go far enough.
Legalization
It's
will
hard.
reduce public responsibility to racism. Arguments that racism continues to inflict serious harm will be dismissed in the same manner as concerns over segregation.
Yeah, but I don't understand. Okay, I get why that's like AF
Yeah.
not far enough. I don't understand
Well,
why
no, it's
that's
that
AF mutually
AF is
exclusive with
interest.
alt.
It's AF is interest convergence that saps energy from abolitionist movements.
Okay, I just disagree strongly that your AF is that good.
Okay.
I guess the DA, and as well, the DA and then the legalization bad for minority communities. What, I understand that normal means might be regulation, maybe, but what card have you read that says that those regulations would be the same ones that your evidence describes, which are Colorado and Washington, super high taxation, high licensing fees, etc.?
The Galip card says that normal means would be disparate enforcement, and the regulation thing is irrelevant to the DA, unless you have more specific.
No, it is super relevant to the DA because it assumes a world in which there are certain regulations on
No,
where
it
you
doesn't.
and how you grow
It says that
marijuana.
the industry will choose to grow it indoors.
Why is that?
Our evidence says that it's more cost competitive, and indoor marijuana is marketed differently to be more profitable.
Okay. Which card says that it'll be grown indoors? That there will be regulations that cause it? Or
If
prevent
the
it from-
legalized marijuana industry expands, the demand for power may increase on a proportionate basis. Indoor marijuana
Yeah,
operations
but I'm
account
asking
for
about the
1%.
regulations that states would create. You've read Av about
Well,
this
the argument
as well.
isn't that states will create regulations. The argument is that the
Then
plan
why is any of
legalizing.
this? Why does any of this link or like? Why does the AF make the regulations that you claim are bad?
Oh, the
Multiple
case argument's
reasons.
about regulations. The DA isn't. Which one are you asking about?
The DA has nothing to do with regulations. It's the fact that marijuana can be legally grown indoors after the plan that will cause energy electricity disruptions.
Are you gonna take a second?
Yeah, I'm gonna take a break.
Okay.
And I need to do this before you.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say. Anything.
just emailing now. Medical research, waste, state experimentation.
Hold up just a second, sorry. Research, waste.
Experimentation.
Yep.
T, the CP, the K, and the
Okay.
Anyone not ready?
Sorry, I'm good.
The advantages in a double-turn experiment that takes your regulation is find the only question is whether allowing political reasons to block experimenters only. The DAs do not group their teams for the threat is growing because of the more antibiotics used in the labs, the more resistant they become, the less useful they are. They're blocking evidence more. Evidence infection control doesn't fail and will spread quickly. McKenna and their chief estimators on the research spot and other artists facts moving around the globe. They're looking for new Johnson detection drugs, suspecting emergency spend much more than Apache. Podcast various system, mounted laboratory detection methods can make the mode infection method show cannot always control the spend budget. Control relevant our impacts in science, literature, but science diplomacy only. We need to be able to problem. There's no way back teams of food wars escalate now or kills a bunch of people that are brown out of other ways. Advantages the low levels of waste only assume current waste, which doesn't answer the Fukushima component of our argument, which is that increased huge wave of radiation spreading from the meltdown. Only how we can solve this takes thousands of lives. Also, we saw more than just low levels of radiation. People are already dying, which is that track or die for us thing now, which is this track for Dr. S. There is an economic incentive to grow. They get a tax credit for cleaning up brownfields and turning them into better, and turning them into areas where people can live. Hemp can be planted for profit, which is a double incentive to do it. Even people with bad motivation. Third is that people can just plant it themselves because it's pretty cheap. Needs to do it now. Legalization turn benefits of legalization outweigh benefits of legalization outweigh the disadvantages of the underground market. Even if they're right about our intent, just mean the puns of bad idea. Climate in 14 when arguments that legalization show the underground market news line it. Communities united participate in a regulated environment. Another report about standards about how most Republicans think also racist like the illicit market force that attracts the people big as all life like tip rather than all the books working big word after American music partnership the American income and general market legalization should be integrated African Americans. I'm afraid I don't get nurse rights such most but let's see have large company intentions behind them and underground markets already disappearing because it's getting boxed out by a privileged medical market. Only risk the plants house hold it until if you're black Latino politicians choose to survive, which is most crucial and we achieve to improve racial justice of like we have heard a lot of actually take go finance feels like state legal because of two gun compromising there campaigns on effect policy change legalization with instead of your 5 choose logical critical folks who are busquets that let you away from medical marijuana. The equivalent 5 is an ideal 5 should be compared to the idea should be prohibition is the only all we've got right now. Legalization promotes an individual grows on a big part market to burn in 14 marijuana. It's not difficult to grow seeds can be still to guard some growth back out that might take longer and attract people more closer to tomatoes. This back to produce the depth of free marijuana genetics with big groups of highly knows big medical ever show even only started plants could retain the seed types only drive medical and home garden. Now the experimentation advantage now the experimentation advantages of the federal government not cracking down is irrelevant. It's a question of whether states have the freedom to implement regulation. How they want things like banking regulation means that they can. Colorado Washington have to have high regulation because they're afraid of interstate spillover, which would lead to a federal crackdown, which the fear causes it loan, which the fear causes loan. It also doesn't signal as long as the federal government still retains ultimate control, doesn't signal state experimentation. They say politicalization, but this is about national gridlock. The status quo proves that states can get things done when the government can't because they're less political. Nanotech being long off is irrelevant. Our evidence is that it's inevitable. We need to be able to regulate to avoid arms races. They've no impact defense on this question. Also leads to Greg, which assures the biosphere AI does cause extinction, causes arms races accidents. They could also have things like 2001 Space Odyssey style and artificial intelligence taking becoming smarter than humans and launching their own attacks to protect themselves. They say They say it's a keeper short evidence indicates that the test kits are sharp and evidence indicates it's true for experimentation of federals in general. They say experimentation is resilient, but their evidence is really just about federals, and we agree federals understand the question is what kind we say experimentation decentralization the status quo is cooperative or something. Else they say the impacts are possible. I have impacts of that above T. We meet the plan to resolve prohibition at the federal level. No, it must be at all levels. Action, chart, rex, background, position, legalization, removing legal prohibition. That's all the rules. When they see the plan, does that get ministerial marijuana is defined by stats on the states of criminal penalty, justified discussion. One stats removal and prohibition solves ground and limits that change directional state vast. There are more poppy liquid shirts like Afghan. They force mental health that doesn't have deep limits. Fats gets picks always their ground where the growth of top tons to state structural blackness and plenty. And they force local fiat that's in festival came in 12 marijuana is not regulated state federal laws by time use marijuana can't be some bits at the city level. And absolute legalization is impossible because international bans U.S. is only the federal government colony except no the term United States even understood. Articles are for the capacity rather than U.S. separate states have rights. United States Constitution, the federal government, parts not given United States that country reserve to the states respect to the states respectively, and no limits exposure to other single laws don't affect nearly all marijuana. Only national ban 2 CSA is the only one for pot, and nearly nearly all grade 91 nearly means 9% or more. No ground unless CSA is the major law banning reasonability is best good. Reasonability is best good is good. No cooking to raise the bottom. The counterplan per to the counterplan plan doesn't say all or never. It's a complex example. The general state must be touching function competitive and compete off explicit man to the plan key to wrap around the cause suggestion to tiny picks and prostitution structure basketball strategy loud. The next function read the plan test that's a low check. It doesn't solve experimentation because it's still at least ultimate control in federal government hands. They'll say that states can still experiment within the regulation that the affirmative sets up, but that is our argument that the federal government always maintains some control. The only way to have experimentation is to green licensed states to regulate absolutely however they can't solve experimentation with other states regulate emerging texts. It's unclear what regulations they initiate or how the federal government would block or what they would do. The counter the plan is an organic process. We don't have specific, which they can't be on organic. They shouldn't be able to be on an organic process, and loopholes mean zero, so long as the exception gets interpreted extremely broadly, renders the counterplan meaningless, i.e. what is indoors, what if you only cover it but still use, but still pump in energy instead of using the sun out and 11 the cash flowing and check screening so they're trying to take machine the legitimate density people were trying to weed helping prevent these first law. This was part of the series of recent mitigation guidelines or preservation no case of the law on the issue, market law on the issue. It doesn't solve experimentation, so it takes marijuana except let's essential function but untrampled letter words constitute regional price competition state government targeted by parents or across state legislation centralized satisfy high proportion of citizens below price government subject broad much support the state safe to 90% major spill federal prohibition the state does stretching federal powers that also undercutting major political benefits of decentralized federal conditionized voting issue creates a time strategy argument responsibility solves relevance only they links to the discount because they make indoor markets unregulated as opposed to regulating them. Permutation do both picture voter still have pressure ground diversity good education and tiny details this that loan check and read that. And indoor grows now listen 14 indoor growing electricity construction grass is taking over to explain ways to reduce consumption emission indoor ag lighting ventilation dehumidification acre striking about electricity non subsidy to have efficient to plants they can. Permutation do both permutation upon non-mutation exclusive parts of the alternative permutation do the alternative if it results in where people can't go to jail for marijuana then obviously includes the plan against the rules prohibitions ethics don't confer asking each other external goods to respond to purity of intention not treating with one sense such a tell tactile it is hard to be them be served real the active conscious policy about unintended consequences of intention about effects by the other most but that seems not as important was to be idealistic on the counterplan doesn't solve medical research because it still leaves marijuana in the CSA which you can't do research on it back to the kid decarceration, no, it doesn't solve only we do Thompson 14. There's no more stake than a mass incarceration part of your just will keep the administrative action to happen if we really to end today's carceration. We have a founder's law being placed in cities showing the decarceration not occurs. There's not all the access from prison is bottom excessive, opposing very particularly communities that leads to support should convict the neg, decarceration, and no, I can read your sorry. Permutation solves best 103 that sort of visual record established legal fan sex will be doing whatever the one to enforce established practice not defend ultimate goals for engagement long term just money friends engaging host of meeting struggles to host around with lives of currently goes not less expensive a vision plans of meeting struggles smooth fails against struggles on those that probably abolition movement must work to structure the divide between the inside and the outside and we also have retroactive release to McCain 14 Colorado Coast where the date to amendment that affects the conviction of handle good the ruling should be interpreted retroactive many there will be workarounds very safely to make this direction and really actually the order courts and I can see what there would be a court that should over the direct mass presidential part of good over national ones go then motion goes affirmative, Ben motion 11 is better not working therefore being coached many forms achieve abolitionary context started domination choose the goals is not to strengthen the shield to establish change short conveyance of signation to perform and non-performance performance are not blue investigation was possible to use positive negative form positive reforms are improvement of the system that any reforms not contributes to the growth of the system as a whole short-term goals for reforms should be kept for the words of the road should be goals for created partial abolition the roads along the long term change the Brian Evans is our framework and is the reason why the alternative doesn't solve because it doesn't have a broader collective that it can spill up to and There's no link we haven't committed to reformism. They just say we don't go far enough. We can permute that motto and take support around the struggle for reforms, not say we're checking for spicy drugs, and we need to advance that. Adult conscious throw past well the combined series of revolution acts, but they fight for the potential go further against much drugs, rights, expand possibly another world, lose more, closer to the rise of the DA, state legalization of medical farms, bullets, enforcing legalization states on energy bars, work going on, consume cheap massive staggering amount, Eugene Washington, the manies build another damage, just get energy marijuana factors app, solves it, Ferris and 14 press for moving, energy resource points to illegal farmers, legalization, hard long energy efficient growing, moving underground to illegal regular works, the best they can have, energy efficient law, universe investigate, best to do, they have to, people need to keep their operations open, there's no internal link there, but one is the small fraction mills, and 12, the education council, our energy, smaller states, part of the cannabis, on most much times as much, 1/3 data centers, 1/7 of refrigerators, no events, common jokes, and lower economic activity will be worse than national validation, hard to economics can be generally, let's community finding each other, more straight versus for each other, coming to scratch, hard to see leaders, helping to believe their countries not properly attacking each other, not to mess, reply correctly, the effect of UC shark, sounds out with any such force, the solutions, and the economic conflict will not make more unthinkable. What is this?
You just want to read it.
EPA regs on Bank 322 the biggest changes how electricity company basically the power plant sets an emission target of 30% 23rd penalty policy to seek to enable putting a price out in regional electricity markets.
I'll email you that. Do you want to read it?
Yeah, kind of. Okay, yeah. We can wait.
Yeah. So important stuff for the Cossacks.
What?
I was just like important stuff for the Cossacks. No, you should get the card. Obviously.
I just sent it.
I can start. We don't have on it.
That was the only joke I was making.
The mechanic card you read says that drug-resistant bacteria can emerge, and there's outdated laboratory detection methods. How does the app solve disease if we can't detect them?
Well, outdated detection just means it takes us longer to detect it, which means that we have trouble controlling it, which is why vaccines are
This
more.
piece of evidence says that it moves around the globe. How does the United States detect diseases that might pop up in like?
I don't know. How did we
countries on
figure
the
out
other side of the
Ebola? How did we
planet?
figure out Ebola was going on before it got to the U.S.? Like
I mean,
we
Ebola
talk-
is
we
an
talk-
antibiotic
we
resistant
talk-
disease that causes the end of
we
species.
talk to other
like you
countries,
said.
and when they detect like significant portions of populations that have diseases, they're like, "Hey, we think there's this thing
Okay.
going on," and countries talk about it. Our argument is that
so
we provide the vaccines for
So
it.
what regulation does the app include that stops like AI from taking over the world, or stops the space odyssey?
It's more of a question of the process of state experimentation rather than specific regulation. Our argument is that when the federal government regulates things, if they get regulations wrong and are unsafe,
But what's what's the difference between a wrong and a right regulation that stops like self-regenerating AI?
if it's not done by the right people who could release it as a weapon or who construct it in a
Okay,
military.
you said that AI will become smart enough to take over the world. Like, all right,
I
whatever.
said it. I said it could. The regulations that state would do, we do not know yet because our argument is that some states will make good ones and some states will make bad
Okay.
ones, and then they'll compare and be like which ones worked, and they'll
The
adopt the ones that are
Ellison
good.
card you read says that.
And A is far away, which is our argument.
Okay, the
Yeah,
Ellison
time.
card you read is talking about. This is on the marijuana dispensaries try hard to maintain the appearance that they are nonprofit health centers, and then says that because there's no basis for determining what's and what isn't a nonprofit health center, that means that it doesn't solve how to supply.
It's applied to the counterplan to show that there is uncertainty over mean like profit or not for profit. What is indoor? What if they still pump in electricity, but they like put a tent over the top and there's not four walls? Like,
Then
is that
it's
no
indoor.
longer indoor?
Yes. All right. Whatever.
What is indoor? Define it for me. Give me a clear definition.
When you're in a fucking building.
Okay, what is-
evidence that you read on the
What is a building?
the evidence that you, the Ferris evidence that you, the Mills evidence that you read on the DA just says that centers and refrigerators are a big contributor of electricity. Do you have any evidence that says that there's volatility in those parts of the market now?
Just that there's a lot of energy coming from
So
it.
then do you have evidence that says that marijuana volatility won't have an impact on the market?
Our argument isn't that it won't have an impact, but that the impact is not large enough to trigger your DA.
Okay, what part of this card do you think?
That part of the card says that on energy compared to things like refrigeration is minimal.
Alright, that's fine then.
We'll take Rob. state experimentation advantage, and then the medical research advantage.
The K, the counterplan, experimentation research.
Mm-hmm.
Experimentation research.
Yes.
Okay.
Did everyone get the doc?
Got docs. Wait. No, not yet.
You did not get it?
Not yet.
Okay. Let me know.
Did you get it?
There it is.
There it is?
Mhm.
Cool. Alright, is everyone ready for me to start?
Critiques on the permutation just a test combination not going for concede util fido. The remediation advantage doesn't get to extinction, so you can functionally ignore the counterplan and solve the entirety of the case in. Authorize, it legalizes the growing of marijuana outdoors, which is sufficient to solve both advantages. First, it allows for the research of marijuana. All you need is the plant to study it, and if it can be grown outdoors, then it can be studied, which means that it sufficiently depoliticizes the scientific study of marijuana, which resolves the scientific diplomacy advantage, and obviously allows for the research that's necessary to solve antibiotic resistance. It also solves the state experimentation advantage because it stipulates that the CSA only applies to a tiny fraction of marijuana that is then banned of indoor, but the entire field of outdoor marijuana growth is still allowed, which means that it gives the states all the regulatory experimentation that they need. The second plank of the counterplan also resolves the advantage. It's the conclusion of the McGinnis article where he recommends actions on the part of Congress, the President, and the Supreme Court that are necessary to create the framework for state experimentation. We're not fiating that states experiment, which means the 2AC answer is nonsensical. We are fiating the legal conditions that McGinnis asks for in the conclusion of the article through acts like the Race to the Top Act, the Supreme Court saying that the Bill of Rights applies to the states, and presidential directives that mandate that agencies respect state experimentation. That is way bigger than the entire internal link, and it's also directly related to nanotech and next-gen tech, which is mandated by fiat, which means we solve more than they ever could. Now, the permutation, it is severance. It does not legalize nearly all marijuana. I will agree that the plan could have regulations afterwards, but it is not possible that those regulations would be ones that ban indoor growing. Here's why. Legalization means the establishment of a regulated market without any market prohibitions. Climate et al. 12. Legalization means the substance will be treated like any other article of commerce with substance-specific regulation seeking to shape behavior, not eliminate market activity. Now, the critical difference between a regulation and a prohibition is whether or not consumer choice of product is diminished. By diminishing the option of indoor-grown marijuana is a prohibition, not a regulation, which means it cannot be an effect of the plan. Friedman 13, the power to regulate is not encompassed the power to prohibit. It's necessary to distinguish regulation from prohibition. The power to regulate is the power to prescribe the rule by which commerce is to be governed. The power to prohibit commerce is the power to bring commerce to an end. The first presupposes the continuation of the regulated activity. The second presupposes that cessation in-service laws protect commerce and encourage participation. They do not trench on choices about which commodities citizens may or may not possess and use. One way to think about operationalizing the distinction is to ask whether there be an identifiable market in the product that is banned in the absence of the law. If so, the law is a ban. If not, it may be in service of the regulation. Compare the ban on the interstate transportation of prostitutes to the prohibition on adulterated drugs. In the latter case, there's no independent market in adulterated drugs. To the extent people know a drug is adulterated, we'll assume they will not or buy or use it. In the former case, however, there's a viable interstate market that the ban prohibits. Here's contextual evidence. Indoor-grown marijuana is a distinct product. The permutation limits consumer choice, which means its severance. Lewis 13, the spur for artificially grown cannabis appears to be consumer data, and indoor growers produce the best-looking buds, which command highest prices. In marijuana dispensaries, artificially grown cannabis enjoys a major price advantage due to largely the more uniformly high quality of the product. They might cross-apply nearly all from the T-flow. All or nearly all includes means the inclusion of all distinct segments of a market. Just L5, substantially all is synonymous with nearly all. A sale of corporate assets to the sale of all is substantially all the corporations property sales to several distinct manufacturing lines. while retaining one or more lines is not a sale of all or substantially all, even though the lines being sold are substantial and include a significant fraction of the corporation's former business. Severance is a voting issue. It eliminates negative counterplay ground and stable link offense and proves that affirmative action isn't desirable. Our model of competition and interpretation of the topic is better. It's the only way to create debates that compare partial versus nearly all legalization. These debates are necessary topic-specific education to determine the proper scope of legalization and regulation, which is an important implementation question that takes the debate beyond the simple question of legalization, yes, no. Their argument that DA's check is ridiculous because regulatory debates are critical to education, not just debating about electricity prices. Now, they say that it's unclear what regulations would happen and you can't define what indoors means. This is ridiculous. Don't get philosophical here. If it's grown in a building, then it's not allowed under the rule of the counterplan. The fact that it's a clearly distinct market now in indoor grown and outdoor grown establishes a clear, bright line of delineation that the government could use. Their loopholes card is not establishing impact, and it assumes loopholes that are much larger than the counterplan. The burden of proof for the 1AR is to prove where the marijuana is grown is critical to state experimentation, which is obviously illogical. You should not presume that all loopholes are created equal, and this evidence is too generic to speak to the mechanism of the counterplan. The conditionality arguments, it's good. First, our offense critical thinking, reacting to multiple attacks increases the affirmative ability to evaluate the best arguments, collapsing down, choosing the negative to make strategic reactive decisions, and the 2NR key to decision-making skills, negative flexibility of F, parametricizes the resolution, knows more about their one F. We have to be prepared for every F. The only check is multiple conditional options. It's not infinitely regressive. Our the time limits quality of arguments check, and affirmatives can make F key arguments, which are offense against all conditional options. Strat and time scroll inevitably because of topicality and disadvantage. Counterplans are not uniquely complex. Perms check the advantage and make fiat. The skiff to counterplan is less threatening than skiff to DA because you can permit. Also, reasonability. We did not irreparably damage debate. The claim that indoor markets exist now but are unregulated is only solved by the counterplan, which bans those markets. The affirmative regulations would be insufficient. Also, those current indoor grow operations are off the grid. More enforcing illegal indoor facilities use diesel and gasoline generators. As production becomes legal, growers will connect to the grid and avoid most use of off-grid gasoline and diesel generators, and Mexican growers still dominate the market. Status quo can't make a dent in prices. Hesed 14 Mexico's the top exporter. Kill most of few states legalize marijuana won't eliminate the flow of the drug from down south. They say pink's bad. They're good. Critical to test the affirmative mechanisms of legalization, which is key to topic education that was above. It's also key to flexibility because they know more about their one F. We need this counterplan. No, it's also no abuse. Lit-based checks infinite regression. We have to find an identifiable market, which there aren't that many of, and it makes the picks predictable because they're grounded in literature. Plan good is offense against every pick. Reject the argument, not the team. Now they say the marijuana in the CSA kills research. Obviously bullshit. If you can grow it, you can study it. We solve all of your advantage. Federalism. Or experimentation. It's the death of state experimentation is inevitable. Arbit cites political polarization, which says it will spill down, which ruins the possibility of effective state experimentation. And EPA fights Trial Link, Peacock, 14 sold out sovereignty states, federalism, trying to represent the amendment is nothing new. Much of the battle over Obamacare turn on the attempts to force Medicaid expansion around the states. The CBP, the EPA is attempting to take federal control of states to a whole new level. States should force the EPA to show its hand in order to halt the creeping federal takeover of state governments, which continues to encroach on one of the most important protections of their constitutional federalism and liberties to meant to guarantee no reversing the death of federalism. Both parties are ignoring state experimentation. Rob 13, Obama's State of the Union address is illustrated with dead letter. Federalism is the Democratic Party sees nothing as outside the purview of the federal government. The Republican Party starts speaking of it to undermine the principle when it hires national power lines between federal, state, and local governments are hopelessly blurred. The federal government spends over $600 billion a year on grants to state and local governments. Now you should reject this nanotech impact. Bostrom is a hack, and all our evidence is from qualified physicists that say gray goo is a scientific fantasy. There's a reason he calls reference to 2001: A Space Odyssey. He conceded the fact that nanotech takes decades. His only claim is that it's inevitable. Even if he's right, the disad impact definitively comes first because the 2AC has conceded a time frame question. No 1AR reversal on here. Also, our indicates that it would not be able to develop in a negative way. Patents prevented. Braun 7 nanotechnologies in advance of the this year rate of profitable commercialization is being hindered by looming legalization. Many potential customers won't begin product development unless they know that we'll be able to provide material at these kinds of scales. And there was cost. There's an unholy race between nanotech progress towards high volume
on the utilization of these older patent expiration dates and regulations in the status quo already solved UN 6. There were two conserve the hadrogens and nanoparticles that social risk, international cooperation, coordination, related role in setting minimum ethical norms for the creation and testing and such substances. Both the EU and the US possess established regulatory systems for which hazard and exposure risk of nanotechnology might be assessed. Now, the marijuana is not critical. Our evidence indicates that it's not the test case because there's overwhelming issues that challenge the authority rather than a particular issue. And if they're right, then research. They do not have any evidence of antibiotic resistant diseases can kill extinction. Our evidence is more recent and it takes into account new antibodies that are being developed and new bioantibiotics that solve the entire advantage. Also, diseases are transnational, which means that there are domestic folks not able to ever solve it. Also, budget cuts kill the advantage. His only response is that we're about diplomacy, not leadership. Obviously, all of the cuts that our evidence described in massive reductions of the budgets of all scientific programs reduce our ability to diplomatically cooperate because things like the science departments do not have the money to engage in those cooperative projects.
So, the Friedman card says a great deal of environmental regulation, for example, does not involve banning any articles of commerce. This is true for laws that regulate smokestack emissions or set clean air or water standards. Why is not eliminating indoor grows an example of environmental regulation for how to grow pot?
An environmental regulation for how to grow pot would be mandating LED energy efficient bulbs. To ban the indoor growing is to remove a distinct product that the market has for consumers to
Okay,
choose.
so the government...
You're allowed to say that the plan results in energy efficient tech, which you did, and the 1NR will answer.
Right, I got that.
But
so,
you can't ban
so let me follow that up. When I was in high school, the government banned Four Locos because they were killing a bunch of people, but marijuana was still illegal, but that was a regulation that limited consumer choice. Are you saying that
No, it's not a
alcohol was
regulation.
not illegal?
It's in fact a prohibition. You can have
They
prohibitions
regulated Four
in a
Loko.
legal
They
market.
regulated Four Loko out of
You're
the market.
saying the word regulation, but you're using it wrong, and you haven't defined it, and we have.
Okay, I got it. So we need to read like a definition of regs. What incentive is there for people who are growing indoors now to switch if it is the only version that is illegal?
To switch to outdoor growing?
Or to get on the grid? Why would they do that?
Are you talking about the world of the counterplan?
I want to know why the counterplan doesn't make sure that indoor growers just keep doing it indoor.
Because it's illegal.
Okay, it's illegal now, and
Because
people
they
are
would
growing.
have the option to grow it in the sunlight and never be harassed by the police.
Why do
or
people?
the DEA.
So are you saying the only reason that people grow marijuana indoors is because they don't want to get caught?
No.
Because that's just not true.
No, the reason they grow it indoors is because it creates more highly potent buds, which sell for higher
And why would
prices.
people want to stop creating those buds?
I don't know, dude. Why don't people make moonshine? Because it's fucking illegal.
People do make moonshine, though.
Okay, true, but the
that is
vast
true.
majority of the vast majority of the market is legal alcohol. Maybe a couple crazies will make their insane buds, but it will never be enough to dent the market to the extent that the DA requires. So you can go.
So
for
what?
that
What
art,
is?
it doesn't
What is?
matter.
How many like indoor grow-ups there need to be to trigger the DA versus not trigger it?
The 1NR will answer that question, but the answer is a fully legalized market.
So, okay, I still don't understand why people who already have indoor grow operations and are profitable would shift to a less good market.
Because it's way easier to grow a shit ton more weed if you don't have to
But
hide
they're
from
already.
the government.
But they're all. But
Does
these-
this actually not make sense?
We've
to
just
you,
all.
or are
But
you just like debating?
No, we've just all. But you have just agreed that the only reason people do indoor grows is not just because of the government.
False. The other reason is because the
Because
DEA,
it's a better product.
That's not the only reason. The other
I
reason
know,
is
that's
it's
what I'm
easier to
saying.
hide from the DEA.
There's a bunch of reasons. You only solve the DEA one.
Okay, I think I've made my point eminently clear. I'm emailing it out now. Just the DA with an overview.
One moment, Ian. I'm getting my thoughts ready. I'm ready.
To set outweighs in terms of the case conceded, hegemony, impact, or liberal no Hamlet indicates that the United States' economic weakness emboldened adversaries globally, destabilizes the power and the stabilizing function of the United States leadership, which means that which means an impact filter, it means that in every region of the world, war is more likely. Economic decline cost projections of war only our impact is backed up by studies. World economic decline may increase likelihood of external cost reduce future relative power, leading to miscalculation, future expectation of trade significant variables, states are likely to gain benefits from trade as long as the optimistic views of future trade relations, the expectation of trade decline likelihood of cost increase crisis could trigger decreased trade expectation. Bloomberg and has found correlation between internal cost and external cost during economic deficit division just governments have in senses fabricate military conflicts. It turns their disease impact. Alexander IX analysts become more common as the economic deficit patterns are already weakened. Public health is creating opportunities conducive for infection. Disease vector more disease are capable of spreading out the world more rapidly. The sequence of events over a period of 30 years has become to a head. The last term causes budget cuts to scientific research, which turns all of the Robertson 9 healthcare in developed countries will suffer budget cuts. Our incomes fall. Resources for disease surveillance are cut factors. Difficult economic jeopardizing system. We rely on to identify and deal with emerging diseases, including the swine flu. Terms of regulations advantage if there's an economic collapse, and it would decrease the ability of the United States to fund things like enforcement efforts for the regulations. Don't low natural control gas prices is key to the retirement of aging reactors.
Don't read it.
Okay. Line below.
The 2AC number 1, they say status quo legalization triggers the link. The counterplan would solve this argument because it would create an option, make it remove federal prohibition, which would mean that they have an incentive to shift outdoors and more to the counterplan. Additionally, status quo growth is insufficient to cause the DZ. It's only legal in a couple of states, and illegal growth doesn't affect electricity demand because it's off-grid to avoid detection. More importantly, legal.
Wait, I read both those cards.
Did I read them?
Yeah, he made the same argument in the counterplan. I read those cards.
Oh, okay, sweet.
And only federal legal, and the counterplan, in a world of the counterplan, there would not be outdoor legal, or there won't be legalization, there will not be state legalization, Kevin, and the industry will not get to the market, Kevin, in 12. The biggest problem is sort of taking over the industry, not 100%,
Actually, scratch that card too. Oh yeah, so the 2NC answers the first argument.
They say the affirmative leads to efficiency. Legalization won't lead to efficiency. Energy requirements are too high, Helen. And 14, legalization won't lead to increased energy efficiency. Unchecked growth of demand confounded energy forecast. Obscure saving criminalization contributed to energy intensity. Legalization will not change the situation materially, and self-interest will overwhelm the push for energy efficiency. Louis 13, few bounds consider environmental costs. Even those who do care about ecological consequences, thwarted by the possibility of certifying sustainable production. Legalization advocates environmental communities give a path to some of the most environmentally destructive agriculture practices found on Earth. Consumers themselves definitely support hyper-destructive farming by their eagerness to pay a premium or indoor products. Interest generates more violence here, some particularly pronounced and illegal. Additionally, the energy efficiency argument wouldn't change electricity prices because that would just create an incentive for them to use it more because it's now cheaper because there is more energy efficiency. Additionally, the link would outweigh our evidence indicates that despite new technology, the massive increase in demand and supply would be enough to radically increase natural gas prices. Additionally, additional energy demand for marijuana legalization will be met with natural gas generation. 2014 indoor marijuana growing with energy eating lights, ventilators, dehumidifiers, massive heatings, and incredibly energy intensive. If legalization continues, there will be a lot more indoor growing with factories, additional energy demand. The grid will likely be met with natural gas generation instead of clean energy sources. They say that there's no internal link because marijuana isn't key. The 1NT evidence indicates that it accounts for 1% of all energy use in the status quo, which outweighs any of their all-cost arguments because it proves that it's sufficient for us to create volatility. Additionally, there's no unique evidence that says that the other things are volatile in the status quo, which means that only the plan can shoot up natural gas prices by increasing electricity demand, and 1% of the market. Marijuana is the most energy-intensive industry in the U.S. Legalization increases consumption exponentially. Warned in 2014, marijuana cultivation is energy intensive, is the most energy intensive of all the major industries. Consumption is expected to grow exponentially as marijuana becomes legalized throughout the country. The total electricity intensity for natural marijuana facilities is on par with modern data centers, and marijuana is particularly important for natural gas because it intensifies peak demand, which is fueled by natural gas by generation. Here 13, the most important factor to cost of marijuana is energy. Marginal demand is much more carbon intensive than average demand, since daily peaks are usually met with natural gas by generators rather than baseload increase. Cannabis cultivation indoors can be a notable fraction of total consumption. Legalized marijuana will at least triple energy demand. Will be significant for utilities. Watson 14. The impact of legalized marijuana are significant to the utility industry. California is the largest market. If the state decides to regulate, that could reach $3 billion. When California moves to legalization, they're going to have to move quickly to curb power consumption. Illegal marijuana will use an absolutely insane amount of electricity. Jeff Esky, and 14, marijuana production is a huge power. It's like producing vehicles is a big electricity hog, which is how the vast majority of illegal marijuana operates. There are inertia in my industry that grew indoors. It's a persuasive idea that indoor cultivation grew with grave growers control production accounted for 1% of all national electricity consumption. Marijuana grow houses use the same amount of electricity these 2 million tons actually cost 6 times the power needs of the entire pharmaceutical industry. Additionally, they say there's no impact to this Jervis evidence. This card just indicates there'll still be economic cooperation that's not effective because our evidence indicates that the United States leadership will collapse, which means that we don't have the military to back up any of the productive aspects of that cooperation. Our royal evidence indicates trade declines, which means that countries lose the incentive to cooperate. Additionally, this argument doesn't answer the impact in our 1C Rebuttals and O'Hanlon evidence. Now, the EPA thumper, this card does not say anything. The part that they underline says that they are considering carbon added features, which just makes the price of carbon. Evidence indicates that natural gas is what's being used to meet the demand in the status quo because natural gas price means that the thumper doesn't take out specific to natural gas. Additionally, reduced demand is keeping natural and retail natural gas prices fell as temperature climbed. The forecast for warmer weather prices fell significantly, led by declines from residential commercial sector consumption continues to fall, stabilizing city consumption. The first multi-day period that's occurred since 2014. Overall consumption of gas for electric power generation fell, and natural gas prices low because of reduced demand. Friedman and 36 this year's origin budget came to like to provide rally in prices. Prices have been settled above $3 since January. They're likely to come. They're coming about natural gas is facing lower demand as weather forecast predict warmer than average temperatures and gas price forecast predict lower prices. GPI 327 S&P lowers prices up to down 75% from a forecast in January. The gas price prediction reflects our assessment of the continued shifting of gas production to lower cost, highly produced production reserve basins, and the impact of the dumper doesn't come close to the magnitude of the link. Our evidence indicates that it would triple electricity demand, create massive increases, and can only be met with natural gas prices. They have no evidence that indicates that the plan would increase the price of natural gas specifically, or that the regulation would increase the price of natural gas specifically.
647.
Experimentation, the outdoor counterplan, then after the DCA.
Research, experimentation, counterplan, DA.
Research experimentation in what ways? Yeah, you're just, okay.
No,
You're fine.
research, experimentation, waste.
The outdoor counterplan. Huh? Yeah, waste is the last case page. And then the pick, or hesitant to call it a pick, the counterplan, and then DA.
Oh man, TOC called it pick. Just kidding.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's no impact defenses, 8 minutes to these are coming against us, and the status quo never causing extinction food. Declining never equals half of the planet. There evidence which indicates 8 years consulted now is 1. Guy studying 1 random piece of technology which obviously wouldn't be widely disseminated. Vaccines are which is 1 see internally cave zero disease. Defense which means their triad detection is irrelevant. If we don't know how to prevent the disease from spreading, they haven't made a quarantine government, which obviously means you should affirm on this question. Custom kill science diplomacy only. Polarization is a crucial internal cave zero comparative evidence. Our evidence indicates the most important issue. Science diplomacy is most science departments are not key to overall science diplomacy. The plan destroys the overall U.S. credibility on things like technology cooperation, etc., which are all not about bunch of state experimentation. These are the state experimentation plus EPA evidence and raw evidence are not about experimentation, but overall federal solution indicates that is mass in the status quo. This is just unique and separate source posture. It's not a hack, this is just a happen one year, even if you won't come our evidence, even if you won't come our evidence still indicates that nanoparticles will never destroy the environment which causes extinction. There regs and patent evidence takes that there are no nano argument indicates it's a nominal status quo. The regulations and patents are all a question of state affected. State regulations or evidence assumes effective regulations which they've conceded only. We saw AI no defense and inevitably causes extinction. Massive arms races, nuclear war, and nuclear war affected AI solves all of their impacts, even if it's a long way off, even if it is a long way off, it is relevant because the triad activity from it solves all of their terminal impacts which means you think that economic decline doesn't kill everybody, etc. You should err strongly affirmative on all of these questions. Our evidence also indicates that it will come very quickly. Things like AI and nanotech self-replicate, which obviously makes the time frame extremely short. The radiation page, yes, radiation causes extinction. We have one carbon 1 which indicates that radiation from fusion will end all life on Earth because it destroys things like all ocean life, plants, the biosphere, etc. No new answers because they assume our impact evidence was shooting down the outdoor counterplan does not solve any from it doesn't solve utilization. It leads to CSA in the book. That was the 2AC prep, which is binding because they did answer our questions. I know about you were in the room, but you can check the tape. They say that they don't remove the CSA from the books, which still causes politicization of crime, politicization of science. You can't study it because you can't walk into a lab with a drug that is illegal and you can't get federal funding. It doesn't solve state experimentation because they create a federal floor, which is a ceiling for the state. It creates a huge regulation in this conditional preemption. I've seen in 14th information will increase supply conditions or reducing your field offices. They don't find federal programs comes in groups 5 local constituent property federalism programs increase federal control conditions responsiveness to story centers of sector federalism housing use of Congress religious following method of cooperative development must legally exist with legal sovereignty consider marijuana license policy without state police federal laws can't enforce the Fed can't enforce its laws benefits are one way branches states and higher regulation but they can never reduce the bail based on leaving the CSA in the books doesn't solve any of the affirmative von Bergen 14th is really the laws is restricted on for marijuana when the CSA classification finds of no matter benefits and can be changed in state status of cannabis do not change this overall fact permutation to the counterplan is not the permutation to the they're making this evidence it does not say it solves the entirety of the affirmative even if they deregulate on some issues the states will still feel constrained and they won't experiment broadly. PPTA and race to the top is not a spillover issue. They have no evidence that it is now permutation to the counterplan does not regulations. The counterplan is planned, which is the 1AC conceded kill that legalization is and indicates that regulations are evidence on this is on point fantastic and it's making a distinction between indoor and outdoor grows does not say what a prohibition is or what regulation is or is not just says that there are distinct things but they doesn't define any of them. The Friedman evidence indicates that the Friedman evidence the Friedman evidence and the Lewis evidence as well as the nearly all arguments are inconclusive. They have no evidence which indicates that the counterplan constrains choice overall. Yes, it is easier to grow certain strains. Proves this argument. There was a on how much caffeine could be in alcohol. Did not prohibit for local just does not get severance and is only plant plus nearly all means 90 which is the best interpretation avoids the worst types of picks. They did the picks that they do that are infinite. Permanent makes these alone obviously solve because they can just say that the plan results in X regulation and X regulation plan is key. Now, yes, there will be.
hear what you're saying. I agree.
I think I need to also go for some combo D arguments.
I know.
Do you want me to just answer their F or F of ours? What?
Whatever needs to happen for it.
email the documents, the cards. The order is the counterplan, the DA, the state experimentation advantage. If I have time.
Say that again, sorry.
Counterplan,
Mm-hmm.
disadd, and then the state experimentation advantage if I have time.
Got it.
One sec, my word is bugging out. Okay, is everyone ready to go? Yeah.
The counterplan solves all three advantages. Once marijuana is legal, then you can study it. Marijuana grown outdoors in the world of the counterplan is fully legal. It can be brought anywhere you want, into a lab or into a college stoner's dorm room. There's no restrictions on the study that is possible after the counterplan, which means this solvency deficit is illogical. The 1AC plan is about next-gen technology, and the affirmative is about weed. Which one will the states feel less constrained by? Obviously the one that literally specifies in the text of the law that they are allowed to experiment on next-gen tech, and the only way to solve hemp phytoremediation is if the weed is grown outdoors in the soil, which the counterplan obviously allows. Now the permutation, I don't think they understand the counterplan. If the affirmative has no regulations, we win the debate, because if the app has no regulations, marijuana gets grown indoors. So I don't know why they'd extend that argument. I'll concede it. This means that the only regulation they could possibly have is a regulation on energy efficiency. Any regulation that limits consumer choice is in fact not a regulation, it's a prohibition. They haven't defined regulation, so in the words of Inigo Montoya, they keep using the word, but I don't think they know what it means. Our Friedman evidence establishes that the only regulations are those designed to guide and enhance market activity, while prohibitions remove a good that a consumer has the choice to produce, like a more potent indoor-grown marijuana bud, which means that any interpretation of the perm that allows them to ban is the severance permutation, which they have conceded is bad. The Four Loko example limits consumer choice, which means our Friedman evidence would say that it is in fact a prohibition and not a regulation. Their definition of nearly all is arbitrary. There's no way to establish a bright line of 90% because you can't collect data on an illegal market. Our evidence from Gestel is in the context of market law and says that it should be interpreted to have all the distinct products within the market. Now, picks are this type of pick is necessary to interesting topic education that has particular debates about regulations instead of legalization, good, bad. Disads obviously don't resolve this. He claims that he'll explain the loopholes thing later, but whoops, never got to it. The dissad. First is the impact capitalist economic collapse causes a turn inwards that ends hegemony. The 1AR warrants is that it causes a turn inwards. Our argument is that that destroys diplomacy and the perception of United States strength, which is necessary to prevent allied prolif and deter our allies. This means we have a filter impact. The entire world becomes more unstable in a world that doesn't have United States hegemony, which means every diesel generator so that they don't get detected. The act has conceded this argument, which means that even if there's indoor growing in the world of the counterplan, because that indoor growing is illegal, that growing will be off the grid, which means it doesn't trigger the dissad. Their 1AR warrant evidence indicates that if it were legalized, the people would move onto the grid. I'll concede your card here because that's our link. It would cause a massive strain on the electricity markets, which would force an increase in demand and triple prices. A conceded argument. Now, they say they won't switch. Even if outdoor grown weed is less potent, it's easier, and you can grow literally acres and acres without intervention by the government, which means that companies would obviously do it. 2MC Crossax was embarrassing for you here. Now, they say it wouldn't collapse the economy. It's a massive disruption to the natural gas market. They've conceded that marijuana is the most energy-intensive agricultural industry possible, and that the plan would triple the amount of growth. They've also conceded our warrants that marijuana lights need to be run 24/7 in order for the plants to be grown, which means that it affects the peak hours of natural gas generation. Now, the 1AR has a theme of shadow extension that has missed every nuance that the block made. They should lose lose the debate for that. Don't allow the 2AR to try to clarify anything that wasn't in the 1AR. Now they say that that in the world of the plan they would just do it outdoors. No, the more potent buds are more profitable, and you've conceded evidence that self-interest overwhelms. Now, the only argument that they can go for is that efficiency regulation solved. One, they've conceded a rebound effect. When it becomes more efficient, you use more of it, which causes an increase in demand that triggers the link. That also conceded that it will always be less efficient than the sun, which is infinite free energy, the world of the counterplan, which means you should always default negative. There's also no incentive to do it because self-interest overwhelms. They've conceded that evidence. There's no possibility they can access a turn here because they've conceded that the indoor growing is off the grid now. It's only a risk they have to make it worse, and it also causes an increase in consumption, rebound effect, shell inverter, North House 14, energy, efficient lighting, more slow and faster growth in energy demand, IPCC and the IEA concluded energy savings associated with energy efficient technologies were likely to result in significant rebounds. Let's mark that card at rebounds.
Huh?
341.
In the what?
So the order is counterplan, use the DA. Is anyone not ready?
The counterplan is not some medical research. The only warrant given the 205 judges. Well, if you can go product doors, you can just bring it in a lab with that. Misunderstands the nuance of the law and how Schedule 1C SA drugs function. Our credit evidence indicates that because of the Schedule 1 status, it deems that marijuana has no medicinal purposes and no positive values, which is what kills the ability of scientists to engage in any form of research, which is that even if you can still grow it outdoors, that is a narrow exception. The counterplan allows for when marijuana can be grown, but that does not mean that the law is off the books, which is the critical prohibition versus regulation argument, which is that all of their spin on the permutation works against them when it comes to the solvency deficit, because they still leave marijuana listed as a Schedule 1 substance. All the exceptions that you can grow it if you're outdoors, you might be able to possess it, but that doesn't solve the legal components of research, which is a part of the CSA and is part of having a Schedule 1 drug. Even if you can have it, you cannot do research on it because it is still classified as a drug that you cannot have research. Our Bornberg evidence in the read the 1 year of the day do not enter also says that it is the question of being Schedule 1, not whether there are exceptions allowed within our evidence. Also indicates that the DA was still blocked because the CSA is on the book, which means that even if you could take pot and try to research in a lab, the DA will still have an incentive to come in and crack down on that. At least it shields research because scientists think there's a chance they can get arrested and have their research smashed. Now, even if you do not buy the weed, or when they do not solve at least a substantial portion of this, because obviously a bunch of research is done indoors, which the counterplan does not solve. They preclude any ability of scientists to grow any form of weed indoors and see how to grow it faster, or what different parts of it they could get to grow, which is the only way they could do it is if the only way scientists could do this is if they just take pot grown outdoors from a bunch of other people, which means they don't get any of their lab equipment. They cannot monitor the weed in the way that they would like to in order to maximize the benefits of it. We have two impacts and they have zero impact, even which does make it triad. First is antibiotic resistance. It's likely only be research on weed can only research on weed can solve this because cannabis has unique medical effects. It goes across the globe. It's a more likely impact in theirs because someone has to pull the trigger, but there is no trigger that needs to be pulled for disease. The only question is whether we have the drugs necessary to be able to solve backward. Second is food shortages. It kills billions. Only science and policy can resolve that, but they block large scale research in they block large scale research. They cannot resolve it.
Yeah.
There's no impact to the economy. We didn't draw hedgerows answered by the O'Hanlon. Hanlon clearly flags in the 1 year of the it disproves the impact. The entire globe, including the U.S., turned inward and hedge didn't collapse. Even if you buy the ridiculous claim that legalization of marijuana would create a spike in electricity prices, that the economy would collapse, it wouldn't even be close to scale of collapse that occurred in 2008. Countries turned inwards because war is impossible to settle population because they perceive it as economically damaging, which answers that diversity of war in their hedge arguments, all disproven by collapse. Worse than anything the plan can cause. Cheeky attempt by the tuner to answer the royal argument, but he really concludes Royal concludes substantial evidence data, and his own study indicates that decline does not cause war. We're studying the conclusion of the article and his own opinion, not the so-called conclusion that you read. Their straw person cutting up his article is him defending the parts of academia that he disagrees with. He also concludes that growth also correlates with conflict, which reduces the risk of solving war enough for the case you have. Now we do not link to the system or efficiency solves it, even if they're right about some of the nuance about people being off the grid. The question is not whether the affirmative results in some increase in the grid use, but whether there's a substantial enough to cause, where it's substantial enough to cause. The plan does allow for regulation, just doesn't mandate them. Our checkmate evidence indicates that the state would implement their own regulations. Think, for example, their own regulations. The Warren Evans said they read the Warren Evans said they reads about Colorado indoor grows and says that when Colorado legalized, they can try to implement their own regulation to box indoor growing out of the market, which is an example of the regulation that the plan could allow our affairs. Evans indicates that you could regulate indoor growing to make it more energy efficient and it leads to more investments in energy efficiency. Their rebound effect doesn't make any sense because demand does not change based upon how cheap it is to grow. They would just capture the problems and use a lot less energy to grow the same amount. If there was more demand, they could sell more. They would just grow more. They wouldn't grow less just because the energy costs are higher. The Bullis Evans Reed says that there are multiple ways that energy efficiency could work, like making cheaper lighting such as LEDs or changing the ventilation system, heating, dehumidification, or air conditioning, which are all things that their evidence lists, which are problems in indoor growing. Now, the Lawrence evidence indicates that the indoor marijuana is already 1% of the total electricity consumption, which proves that most of the impact is happening now there. Baltic Card says that indoor marijuana has advantages like growing faster, that people wouldn't want to switch anyway. Now, the Howland evidence they read says that legalization won't increase efficiency alone. The underlying part says the reason that is because there would need to be regulations in addition to just legalization, which we think the plan results in, which is the Schechtman Evans. The Lewis card is an affirmative card because it says people don't give a shit about the environment, only profits, which is why the indoor growing market needs to be regulated. The Warren Evans is an affirmative card because it says that a bunch of metric tons are already being used for indoor growing, and there is still a bunch of them that is already on the. There's still a bunch that is
already on the grid, and they haven't. I mean, they can't quantify like whether we increase only a little and there's energy efficiency or not. At worst, like the risk of like is linear in our list.
I'm on.
That's the mic.
Go Interlake Debate. Buy an Interlake Debate T-shirt.
You're staring at the mic.
Yeah, that's the mic. Camera's back there.
Even idiots can wear it.
That was amazing.
How many people are watching right now?
29.5. That was great.
All right.
Nice
Take it
to
easy,
meet
Stevie.
you.
decision's a 3-0 for the negative.
Okay, I'll talk. I guess maybe the reason that I pull the trigger a little bit quickly is that I think I'm very much on the same page as Cal in terms of the solvency deficit in this debate. There seems to be a disjuncture in the way that kind of both sides are understanding this, and I'm trying to give you all the benefit of the doubt by reading evidence, etc. But the distinction that I cannot sort of get over in my mind in regards to this medical research question is John clearly makes the argument earlier in the debate that they functionally get separated into two products where one of them is still on the Schedule 1 substance list and one of them is not, right? And frankly, I don't understand what the link is to these CSA arguments after the 2AR. Like, I just functionally, I don't get it. Like, I read your evidence 1,000 times, I think they all impact very well the reason why that sort of CSA adjustment is necessary, but I think that the counterplan performs that by removing the relevant portions of this there. And I think that's problematic in this debate because to me, in a lot of ways, the solvency deficit question is in some ways a yes or no question, right? It's like either you're right about these CSA arguments or not because a lot of the other stuff that you're going for is totally contingent on that. And I do kind of appreciate your desire to kind of collapse the debate down to that one solvency issue in 2AR, and I think that's in general a good move. Just in this case, I guess I could not get over whatever the mental disjuncture that you and I have about whether or not you are correct about that question. And so, in my mind, that sets up obviously a much lower threshold for what they would need to weigh in on the disadvantage in order to be successful. I think that you're overselling kind of like how far ahead you are on the impact questions of this a little bit. I don't agree with you that they like totally concede this hedge claim, etc. I don't think that your defense gets nearly close enough to 0, I guess, given that I don't think that you win the solvency deficit. I think that you're in a little bit worse shape on the link debate of this portion just because it's hard to kind of recover from the 2-hour framing in two ways. First is obviously just I don't think that they need to weigh in a huge risk of this. But the second part is just like these rebounding arguments or whatever they're called are not particularly well dealt with, and in some ways they kind of turn your turn in one sense, right? And also just like, I'm not a big fan of kind of like risk of a link analysis in general, but it does actually make intuitive sense in this case that if you do lead to increased amount of this or whatever, that even efficiency or whatever is still increased usage. So I don't think that this disad is like God's gift to disads. I just think that they win a sufficient risk of it given that we're at a different point in the solvency portion of the debate. Just like a couple of total side notes. The first is, honestly to me, and I already here, I do think that maybe the competition questions, just like pressing on those earlier in the debate might be the way to go against this type of counterplan. That's just like my, just like for future reference, Jack, I had a really hard time understanding at the beginning of your speeches or whatever, if this had been a debate that was not a panel, I would have been able to clear you.
So just like the CS literally like obstructs research, so it can't be conducted. Not that there's like some sort of like psychological effect of it. And so I thought that the counterplan by narrowing the scope of the CSA basically solved that. The crackdowns argument, like also the card that I think you think makes the crackdowns argument is Dublin evidence. Says that the DEA is like politically obstructed research, but not that they'd like go lab to lab and like shut down an outdoor growing operation. And I didn't really think the 1AR card that was read said much at all. But so I concluded that there was like a very small solvency deficit and that while there's like certainly mitigation on the DA, that it was just a relatively larger risk. I guess my advice for the affirmative would be like find some more evidence that like supports this chilling effect argument. Because that's probably like the right line of argument to be pursuing, but I just didn't think the Ev really supported it. And like maybe invest time in like theory, like because it does seem like I couldn't tell you like what the argument for why this isn't competitive would be with the debate went down.
Yeah, I mean that would be like, I mean I guess I'm sorry. You can
no, go ahead.
Yeah, like for me, like I certainly agree that like I didn't feel like research deficit going like into the 2AR, but I just felt like I just thought we were really behind on some definition questions, and I didn't really think that that was a winnable debate.
Earlier.
Yeah, I agree that like I thought that there was unlikely to win a permutation like after the way like the block went down, but just like having a
permutation or competition arguments are.
So what kind of things do you think we need to be reading to make this
a
work?
card defining regs, like you said in the 2NCCX, you like kind of realize like, oh, we need to read a card defining regs. Like in the 2AC, if you just had a push on this counterplan is a regulation, like you're golden. So I'm gonna do my whole thing.
Yeah, sorry, please do.
No, go ahead.
Please do.
Or yeah, you're fine. So I think that I'm probably the most aff on the research solvency deficit, but I still concluded that it solved enough and the DA was big enough. I think the counterplan is certainly not as good for research as the plan. It's unclear how a system where one marijuana product remains Schedule 1 and the other marijuana product is completely legalized would work for medical research. And neither team's EV really contemplates this, and that's not a failing of either team's EV, because this is just a scenario that is so bizarre in a actual policy sense that I cannot reasonably expect anyone's evidence to account for it, because it's like one of those things that debate just makes up. And I still have to think about how this would function as a policy, so I do that, and I think that it creates two marijuana products, like the other judges have said, outdoor grown and indoor grown, and legal, it's no longer scheduled, any of that. It's available for researchers can get it. They just have to get it from an outdoor grow operation. I thought the 2AR solvency deficit, like Jake said, researchers can't grow their own. That was really interesting. I thought that could have been something for you had it been earlier, and it makes products thing that you're going for, but it's just it's not an EV, and if it's not an EV, it's fine if it's said just earlier in the debate. Yeah, okay. The 1AR explanation of the solvency deficit, I was very careful to trace this back, was you can't go into a lab with an illegal product, is what Jack says. And I think that that's kind of just applying the scheduling argument. There's not really a distinction between outdoor and indoor grows for the solvency deficit. I think that what would have been great, this counterplan politicizes the hell out of research. What is the scientific difference that justifies saying there's no medical utility of indoor marijuana, but there is a medical utility of outdoor marijuana? They are the science politicization that that scenario of your AF is about. The problem is that you don't you accept this 2NR frame that all that matters is the tangible research, and the 2AR does not extend politicization as a really distinct thing. Like you say, when you're extending the science co-op solvency deficit, you just say they impede large-scale research. Impact is food wars. And I just don't think that's the correct framing. I just can't give you credit really for an argument that the counterplan politicizes science without framing it in those precise terms. I think that's kind of narrow, but it really makes a difference, because the 2NR has said that all that matters is the tangible research. And you've not contested that frame, so I can't do it for you.
So do you, and I guess maybe doing that is one possible route, but do you all think there was a winning 2AR in this debate? Or we needed to do work earlier to make this winnable?
I think that the 1AR should have kind of either just radically focused in on competition or just been as deep as possible on solvency deficits.
Yeah, the 1AR tried to do too much.
Yeah.
That was my thought. It's just being a little more selective with kick one of the advantages and then only go for that solvency deficit.
So our pumps really started earlier than the
Yeah,
2AR. And I mean, I agree with you. I didn't feel great about going for medical research, but I didn't know what else I could have done.
Yeah, right. That makes sense. And I can run through my DA part real quick too. I think it's decently big. Royal or not, there's some likelihood that economic sort of weakness or decline inspires challengers and war ensues, not because they go to war for resources because their economy has declined, but because they opportunistically see a weakened United States. Royal back and forth mitigates that impact somewhat, but it's O'Hanlon and Lieberthal is a little bit distinct enough that I think that if you win a large reduction of just the economy impact, they still have a thing that's distinct enough that if you're not winning a solvency deficit, they can win the debate on that. Sure. I thought the place where the neg was doing the best was on the sufficiency of marijuana to spike gas prices and the efficiency links. I thought their was surprisingly good that that wide-scale legalization means everybody kind of gets on the grid, and they have a card that's sufficient to dramatically impact utilities' projections of demand, and that is sufficient to cause a price spike. And is this gonna end the American economy? Obviously not. If natural gas prices go up, they go up for weed businesses too, and then they stop using so much of it, and then prices go down again. It's dumb economics, but the defense that you're going for is A, marijuana not that big, which I think they have really good ebb on, and B, efficiency, which I also think they have a couple of really smart distinctions on. Like, efficiency can't be offense for you because they're way ahead on all this stuff is off the grid now. So if you get on the grid but efficiently, but you still get a massive amount of marijuana on the grid, it's still a massive increase in demand. Yeah, and the rebound effect card that they've read is pretty good, and like you guys don't really have a counterspin to rebound effect, so I thought that they were doing really well on Link.
Yeah. I was worried about the like off-grid stuff too.
Yeah.
Still, even if we're worried about efficiency, they still will win a huge increase because we have even efficient indoor growing is still.
It's coming
a lot
onto the
more
grid.
That's on the
more
grid.
more than none. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. Because they're not on the grid now, we can't win any like offensive.
like directionality only one way.
Yeah.
That sucks for you all. I totally get what
Yeah, and I mean, do you all, absent like us readily, and what I'm actually doing is seeing if we have a definition of regulation somewhere.
We do.
Okay, I guess we'll talk about it.
That's a not in public conversation.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about the bizarre? So the counterplan is bizarre in the way that you identified, but do you think that maybe some ebb about like something like moonshine, where the same product exists, but one is treated legally different than the other in a huge way, would make the counterplan?
Maybe, but does that? I mean, who the fuck is like? I'm gonna write about like what? Why would that exist in the real world? I don't know why that card would happen.
Yeah.
Like, there's no like. It's okay that this doesn't have evidence, but I think you might be going down some type of weird research black hole to try to.
Well, yeah. I guess my question was like, would you all think that card would help us at all, or you think it's not necessary?
I think if I was designing this strategy from the ground up, I would get funky with the counterplan text. I would say remove marijuana from the CSA, remove indoor from the CSA, but criminalize it in a non-CSA piece of legislation.
Yes, it's not medical.
So like, you know, because the scheduling, and like that's weird too. You know, the AF certainly can get, and that raises competition issues. Like if they only take it out of the CSA, you put it in a new thing. That's you know, maybe there's competition issues there, but I think you could like mess around with the CP text a little bit. Why don't you just like add a plank that clarifies that research is explicitly allowed on outdoor marijuana, just like to solve some certainty stuff. Like there's no cost to doing that.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
That's fair.
And yeah, like the first instinct when I heard the counterplan text was just like, maybe there are like reasons that I don't know about or whatever. It did not seem well enough adapted to their plan text. It seems like 5 minutes more before the debate to just sort of like think through the way that would operate, especially if the debate did come down to like these questions of regulations, like use of the term legalized, whatever. I don't know. It just didn't seem as well thought through as maybe it should have been in this big of a debate. One other thing I wanted to just yell at you about, Spurlock, was I thought that the 2 and not yell, you know, politely tell you to do better. I thought the 2 NC on the solvency deficit stuff was much better fleshed out than portions of the 2 and R. And kind of the issue that I have with the way that the 2 and R is gone down is that it's not really divided into taking care of the distinct solvency deficits as much as maybe it could be. You know what I mean? It's like there's a moment like. You seem really gung-ho about this second plank stuff, and that second plank stuff is awesome, but I think taking a step back and being like, okay, they've clearly messed up the second plank portion of the debate, which is going to preclude them from going from these other solvency deficits. They need to buckle down on what they still have left absent the second plank stuff. Would have been nice, and I think that if you had that sort of thought calculus, then you could have done as good of a job as you did in the 2NC in terms of this research question, because the kind of like 2 different products distinction is so much clearer in the 2NC than the 2NR. So I think maybe that would have made it more inclusive.
So I'll excuse this because you're a KD, but there was this thing that you said in the 2, or that Needy said in the 1 and R called turns the case, that the 2 and R could include.
Yeah.
And then if they win a solvency deficit, you can still win.
Oh. Okay. Well, did we have a turns the case argument?
Yes!
No. Did we have a turns the case argument to the impact?
Yes!
I thought they were going for state experimentation, which we didn't have turns case to.
They went for research. What are you talking about?
No, I thought. I thought for sure that they would go for state experimentation.
But the research turns the case thing is like 5 seconds. Extend it.
Yeah, that's fair.
And cross by my other argument about how you could have realized what their solvency deficit was going to have to be if you had undergone the thought process
Yeah.
that we just discussed.
Okay. Yes.
You thought they were going for state experimentation and you cut the conclusion of their article and counterplan texted that? Are you kidding?
And then they never talked about the counterplan.
You really
Why
are
would
a
they do that?
dude.
Yes, that's what I thought. I didn't have to say that.
Well, you thought wrong, sir.
Like, sorry.
You don't have to apologize. We're just, like,
thought you were
I'm
saying
just
no.
good naturedly making fun of you. Like,
Yeah,
like you executed just fine. Obviously, you won the debate, so.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I will.
Oh, it's for that.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Yeah, good luck, everybody.